The room was dark. Eram tout de matin, and the phone wouldn't stop ringing. It didn't just ring, it screamed. A frantic, high-pitched jingle that cut through the silence of the Upper East Side penthouse. Marvin, the fixer, Jones, slammed a hand onto the mahogany nightstand, knocking over a half-full glass of scotch. He didn't curse. He didn't need to. He just knew. Trouble never called this late unless it was colossal. He picked up. His voice, usually a smooth, deep baritone, was sandpaper. "Yeah. Marvin, it's Susan. Jesus, you won't believe this." Susan was Denzel Washington's longtime publicist. Her voice was thin, bordering on hysteria. She sounded like she'd been running a marathon barefoot. "Did he miss the flight?" Marvin asked, already reaching for his silk robe. Standard celebrity drama. "Worse, so much worse. It's not missing a flight, Marvin. It's viral. It's an incident. It's a moment." Marvin paused. Viral meant uncontrolled. An incident meant damage. A moment meant legacy. "Give me the short version, Susan." "The Acela, Marvin. Yesterday, D.C. to New York. Coach class, for Christ's sake. Denzel was just trying to rest. A kid, a college kid, total mouthy jerk, massive headphones, blasting some garbage hip-hop, loud enough to shake the carriage." Marvin closed his eyes. He could picture it. The weary grace of the man who had played Malcolm X. The exhausted dignity of the man who had faced down corruption on screen for 30 years, now forced to listen to synthesized noise pollution. "And Denzel said something," Marvin stated. It wasn't a question. He did, but that's not the problem. The problem is that someone filmed it. A banker, maybe? Quiet guy in a suit. He uploaded a 30-second clip 5 hours ago. It has 2 million views and counting. It's tagged everywhere. Marvin walked to the window. Below, the city was a quiet, sprawling beast, oblivious to the small drama about to engulf it. "What did he say, Susan?" A deep breath on the other end of the line. A nervous gulp. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. "That's why it's terrifying, Marvin, the kid, the punk." He filmed his whole mouthy response. But when Denzel spoke, the air went out of the room. The kid just deflated. Susan paused, letting the silence stretch. Denzel Washington looked at a kid who represented everything lazy, loud, and entitled about this new generation, and he said one sentence, just one, and it stopped him cold. Marvin stared at his reflection in the glass. The story wasn't about loud music. It was about authority. It was about what happens when an immovable force meets a very movable object. What was the line, Susan? The headline the internet is using? They're calling it the Great Unmasking. And Marvin, this kid, Jake, he didn't know who he was dealing with. He didn't know he was stepping onto a stage that Denzel Washington had already built, brick by painful brick, over 5 decades. Marvin felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The true battle was never fought on a movie set. It was always fought on a train, in the quiet, desperate moments when character was all you had left. The kid had messed with a legend, and now the legend was about to be weaponized. He grabbed his jacket. "Send me the link. Wake up the legal team. We need to control the narrative. Tell Denzel to stay off his phone. No statements. Not yet." Marvin didn't know it yet, but he was already too late. To understand the weight of that single sentence, you had to understand the weight of the world Denzel was carrying, and the sheer lightness of the one Jake inhabited. This wasn't just a story about noise pollution. This was a collision between 2 eras of American culture, played out in the sterile confines of a commuter car, against the backdrop of a nation fracturing under the strain of constant noise. Denzel, the weight of the crown. In late 2023, Denzel Washington was tired, profoundly, bone-deep tired. He had just wrapped a grueling 8-month shoot for a historical drama that demanded not just emotional intensity, but physical transformation. He had dropped 20 pounds, aged himself 30 years with prosthetics, and spent every waking moment immersed in the painful history of the civil rights movement. The film was already generating Oscar buzz, but the cost was personal. He wasn't flying private this time. He just needed normalcy. He needed the anonymity of a window seat, the low hum of the rails beneath him, the rhythmic click-clack that, for him, sounded less like travel and more like meditation. Denzel was 68 years old, and he carried the burden of representation. Every movie he chose, every word he spoke was analyzed, praised, or ripped apart by a public that demanded flawless morality from their heroes. He was one of the last true cinematic statesmen, the kind of actor whose silence carried more volume than most people's screams. His publicist had begged him to fly. "It's too risky, Denzel. Just take the G5. Denzel had simply smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I need the ground, Susan. I need to remember what normal friction feels like." He was looking for peace. What he found was Jake. Jake, the echo chamber. Jake Rourke was 20 years old, a digital native who lived inside his phone. He attended a respectable university in D.C. studying media arts, which, translated, meant he spent most of his time trying to build a following on platforms that rewarded outrage and volume. Jake was the product of a culture that prioritized self-expression above all else. Rules were for sheep. Consideration was weakness. He wasn't malicious. He was simply unaware. The world outside his headphones, a massive, expensive, noise-canceling pair of cans, was muted, irrelevant background noise. His universe was housed entirely within the streaming audio of his phone, cranked to the absolute maximum. Jake's entire online persona, the Rook 222, was built on a foundation of mild cynicism and aggressive counter-cultural commentary. He had a pinned tweet from 6 months ago criticizing a major historical epic. "Old Hollywood needs to stop telling us how great the past was. It sucked. Everything is better now. Boomer facts are fake news." He held a general vague resentment for the established order, a resentment that manifested mostly in noise and visual clutter. His backpack was stuffed with graphic novels. His hoodie was oversized. He walked with the confidence of someone who had never truly faced consequences. His train ticket was bought by his parents. He was heading home to the suburbs of New Jersey for a quick, mandatory family dinner. He saw the train as a moving prison, and his music was his declaration of independence. He didn't recognize Denzel Washington when he boarded the Acela. Why would he? Denzel was the past. Jake was the future. The stage was set. The quiet, exhausted veteran seeking respite, and the loud, aggressively present novice seeking attention. Two men who, through no fault of their own, were destined for a collision over the simple, ancient matter of respect. The Acela Express car, designated Quiet Car 3, was the kind of space designed specifically for the affluent exhaustion of the Northeast Corridor. It smelled faintly of expensive leather, stale coffee, and the sterile cleaning solution used by Amtrak. The clientele were lawyers, lobbyists, and technology executives. They were the silent people who ran the invisible machinery of the country. They communicated in the hushed keystrokes of MacBooks and the barely audible sigh of weariness. Denzel Washington settled into a window seat, 4A. He wasn't disguised, but he had pulled a simple, worn baseball cap low over his eyes and wore a plain, dark puffer jacket, the uniform of the man trying to disappear. He didn't want the fuss. He didn't want the selfie requests. He just wanted the rhythmic trance of the rails. He ordered a bottle of water and a black coffee. He pulled out a worn paperback, not a script, but a biography of Frederick Douglass, and opened it. His breathing slowed. He was safe. For now. The car was almost full but profoundly silent. The only sound was the muted whir of the train hitting 120 miles an hour outside Wilmington, Delaware. Then Jake Rourke walked in. He didn't walk. He swaggered. He was carrying a backpack that looked heavy enough to house small appliances, and the bright orange soles of his high-top sneakers squeaked slightly on the carpeted aisle. He was focused entirely on his phone, scrolling through music playlists. His arrival was a disruption, a physical intrusion of chaos into order. He stopped directly across the aisle from Denzel, at seat 4D. Denzel, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, glanced up from his book. He saw the youth, the entitlement hanging around him like a bad cologne. Jake dropped his backpack onto the seat beside him with a loud thump that made 3 professionals look up momentarily, annoyed. Jake didn't notice. He was already selecting his soundtrack. He settled in, pulled his massive black headphones over his ears, and hit play. The music was a throbbing, synthesized trap track, heavy on bass, minimal on melody. It wasn't just audible. It was physically present. In a normal train car, this would have been rude. In the designated quiet car, it was an act of aggression. The music was loud enough that Denzel didn't just hear it. He felt it. The bass vibration traveled through the shared infrastructure of the seats and hummed softly against the soles of his shoes. Denzel closed his book, placing his thumb between the pages to hold his spot. He stared straight ahead, trying to will the vibration away. Just ignore it. Just close your eyes. A middle-aged woman 3 rows ahead, dressed in a sharp blazer, looked back, shooting Jake a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Jake, operating in his self-imposed audio bubble, didn't register the look. He was nodding his head slightly to the beat. The tension in the car solidified. It wasn't just noise, it was disrespect broadcast in high fidelity. Denzel counted to 10. The quiet professionals around them were now exchanging strained, knowing glances. No one wanted to be the one to speak up. Confrontation on a commuter train is a social hurdle few are willing to clear. It's better to suffer in silence and fantasize about writing a furious Yelp review later. Denzel took a slow sip of his coffee. It was too bitter, too cold. He looked across the aisle at the kid. Jake's eyes were closed, his face a mask of self-satisfied beatitude. The music thumped. Bomb, bomb, crash, bomb. Denzel knew he had to move, not just for himself, but for the principal, for the tired woman in the blazer, for the silent lawyer typing furiously, trying to meet a deadline. He took another long, slow breath. This was the moment, the trivial moment that defined character. He leaned slightly into the aisle, keeping his voice deliberately low and even, just loud enough to cut through the bass vibrations. "Excuse me, son." Jake didn't hear him. The bass throbbed. Bomb. Denzel sighed, a sound that carried decades of weariness. He waited for the next gap in the track, the brief half-second pause before the loop started again. He leaned forward again, projecting his voice just slightly more, enough to break the membrane of the quiet car's silence. "Excuse me." This time Jake felt the movement. He opened one eye, irritated, and paused his music, yanking one side of the massive headphones off his ear. The residual noise in the headphone cup still hissed faintly. Jake looked at Denzel, but didn't recognize Denzel. He saw an old man in a baseball cap. An interruption. "Yeah?" Jake asked, his tone clipped, instantly defensive. The single word carried the full weight of youthful annoyance. Denzel, still seated, kept his hands calmly folded in his lap. His eyes, the intensely focused eyes that had held the screen captive for generations, were fixed on Jake. "This is the quiet car," Denzel said, his voice measured, deep and steady, the kind of voice that never needed to shout. "The music is disrupting the silence." Jake smirked, a quick dismissive facial tick. He looked down at his phone, then back up at Denzel. "Dude, relax. It's not that loud." Jake lied, gesturing vaguely at the headphones. "And I'm heading out in an hour anyway. Just chill." He made a show of putting the headphone back over his ear, ready to hit play and end the interaction. He had dismissed the old man. The incident was over, he thought. Denzel didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. But something shifted in the atmosphere. The temperature of the carriage dropped 10 degrees. Jake had just committed the cardinal sin. He hadn't just ignored the request. He had belittled the requester. The lawyer 3 rows back stopped typing. The woman in the blazer held her breath. All eyes, subtly, were now fixed on 4A and 4D. Jake saw the famous face now, the unmistakable bone structure, the piercing gaze. But in the context of the interruption, the recognition didn't breed respect. It bred annoyance. "Oh great, an old celebrity who thinks he owns the place." Denzel didn't just look at Jake, he looked through him. He unfolded his hands slowly and placed them on his knees. He took his time rising, a slow, controlled movement that suggested immense power being unleashed deliberately. When Denzel stood up, the space around him seemed to contract. He wasn't a large man, but his presence filled the entire aisle. He stepped the single foot across the aisle, placing his body directly in front of Jake's seat. Jake, suddenly realizing this wasn't ending quickly, shifted uncomfortably. His bravado began to curdle into genuine unease. "Listen, Mr. Washington, right? I'm sorry, but I really need to finish this track. I'm trying to focus," Jake insisted, still trying to use his phone as a shield. Denzel ignored the name drop and the apology attempt. He just looked down. "You're trying to focus," Denzel repeated, the words slow and dripping with significance. "And what about the man behind you? The woman ahead of you? Are they not trying to focus?" "They can just ask me to turn it down," Jake muttered, looking anywhere but Denzel's eyes. "I did," Denzel stated simply. "Yeah, but I mean, like they can—" "No, I asked you, and you told me to chill and that you were leaving soon." Denzel leaned in just slightly, Not aggressively, but like a predator measuring the distance to its prey. You confused my politeness for weakness. That's a mistake. Jake felt his heart rate spike. This wasn't a standard celebrity tantrum. This was different. This wasn't anger. It was cold, dissecting disappointment. Look, I'll turn it down, okay? Chill out, Jake said, his voice trembling slightly now. He reached for the volume button, ready to drop it a few notches to satisfy the star. But Denzel stopped him. He didn't touch Jake. He didn't need to. He simply held up a hand. Don't touch the volume yet, son. The silence in the car was absolute, broken only by the external rush of the air past the windows. Denzel lowered his voice again, the sound now a profound theatrical whisper that only Jake and the immediately adjacent passengers could hear. He looked deep into Jake's eyes, locking them into place. He saw the flicker of defiance, the desperate attempt to save face dissolving into pure, unadulterated fear. This was the moment. Denzel delivered the sentence. You think the world is loud because you've never been quiet enough to hear what it's trying to teach you. The sentence hung there, heavy and dense, carrying the weight of all the characters Denzel had ever played. The righteous cop, the weary father, the flawed genius. It wasn't a scolding. It was a profound, unsolicited philosophical intervention. Jake froze. His defensive posture collapsed. That wasn't just a request to turn down the music. That was a direct attack on his entire life philosophy. You think the world is loud? He stared up at Denzel Washington, who was framed against the narrow window, the setting sun catching the intense seriousness of his gaze. Jake saw the decades of earned respect, the grueling work, the sheer force of character that stood before him. In that moment, Jake Rourke was no longer looking at a cranky actor. He was looking at a summation of gravity. He realized he hadn't just been rude to a stranger. He had committed a profound act of social illiteracy in front of a master of human observation. The shame was immediate and overwhelming. Jake didn't utter another word. He swallowed hard. His hands, which had been clutching the phone, went slack. He reached up, took the expensive headphones off his head and slowly, deliberately, turned the phone completely off. The silence that returned was deeper, more profound than before. It felt like the air had been scrubbed clean. Jake tucked the phone and the headphones into his backpack. He looked up at Denzel, his eyes wide and vacant, the arrogant sneer completely gone. I'm sorry, sir, Jake stammered, his voice small and genuinely broken. I didn't realize. Denzel simply nodded, the slightest dip of his head acknowledging the surrender, the lesson absorbed. He stepped back across the aisle, easing himself back into his seat 4A, picking up his biography of Douglas. He did not look at Jake again. The event was over. The lawyer 3 rows back went back to typing. The woman in the blazer let out a soft, silent breath. The train continued its journey toward New York, but the atmosphere had been irrevocably altered. The leak, the confrontation lasted less than 90 seconds, but that was all a man named Gary needed. Gary, a financial analyst on his way back from a meeting at the Pentagon, had been sitting 2 seats back, typing up an urgent memo. When Denzel stood up, Gary instinctively knew a moment was unfolding. Without hesitation, he discreetly held his phone vertically beneath his laptop screen, recording the full exchange. He didn't capture Denzel's full face, only the profile, the back of the baseball cap, and the sheer intensity of the interaction. Crucially, he captured Jake's initial bravado, the thumping bass and the immediate, terrifying collapse after Denzel's sentence. Gary posted the clip to X, formerly Twitter, under the innocuous caption, Denzel teaches Gen Z a lesson in manners. Quiet car, DC to NYC, just witnessed true gravity. He tagged Denzel Washington's official account, Jake's school, and a handful of viral content accounts. It wasn't a leak, it was an explosion. The immediate aftermath, 0 to 12 hours. By 4 a.m. when Marvin Jones was getting dressed, the clip had jumped from X to TikTok, complete with dramatic sound effects and stylized text overlays highlighting the key line. You think the world is loud because you've never been quiet enough to hear what it's trying to teach you. It became instantly meme-worthy, but unlike typical celebrity incidents, the narrative was unified. Denzel was not the villain. He was the sage, the weary elder dispensing wisdom. Sample social media reactions. Twitter, X, The Real Gary's. Original poster. Update. The teenager cried a little, then sat in absolute silence for the next 45 minutes. Denzel is still reading his book. This wasn't a fight, it was a baptism. Denzel Washington, quiet car, respect, media maven ATL. This is the most important cultural commentary of the decade. We've outsourced respect to volume controls. Denzel didn't just win an argument. He redefined the terms of engagement, the unmasking, boomer facts. Finally, someone told these entitled children that the world doesn't orbit their AirPods. Denzel for president. Woke warfare. This clip is problematic. Denzel used his celebrity status and patriarchal gravitas to shame a young man simply engaging in self-care. Toxic masculinity. 101. 2 replies. 400 quote tweets roasting this user. 3 such YouTube comments. Under Denzel's epic train takedown. User, Wisdom, Seeker, 77. You can see the exact moment that kid realized he was talking to a king. It's not about the celebrity, it's the character. That line should be taught in schools. User, headphones gone. I use those exact headphones. I'm turning my volume down immediately. I don't want Denzel to appear in my living room. User, millennial tired. As a 35-year-old trying to work in a coffee shop, Denzel is my spirit animal. The noise of modern life is exhausting. Thank you for shutting down the noise. User, Jake Simp. Why are we celebrating public shaming? The kid was just listening to music. He paid for his ticket too. Leave him alone. User, Trainer Dan. A Jake Simp. He paid for a ticket in the quiet car. Context matters. And Denzel is right. It's about listening. Druatiul, the panic in the Rourke household. When Jake finally got home, he looked pale and shaken. He didn't mention the train. He went straight to his room. The next morning, his mother, Carol Rourke, woke up to a panicked call from her sister. Carol, turn on the TV. It's Jake. The story was running on Good Morning America. The headlines were savage. Manhattan Daily News. Denzel delivers the Oscar-worthy shame. Rude teen silenced on Amtrak. Online. Quiet riot. Did Denzel Washington just cancel a college kid's career? The Washington Herald. The sound of silence. Actor's one sentence defines a generation gap. Carol Rourke watched the grainy video, horrified. She recognized the jacket, the headphones, and the defiant shrug that preceded the fall. The shame was paralyzing. Her son, whom she raised to be polite, was now the global face of youthful disrespect, personally dismantled by one of the greatest actors alive. Jake, cornered in his room, tried to fight back. He posted a hastily written defensive statement on his burner Twitter account. It was a misunderstanding. I apologized. The media is blowing this up. Stop harassing me. The internet merely laughed. The full video, Jake's initial defiance, was already too entrenched in the public consciousness. He was caught. Marvin Jones, Denzel's fixer, finally spoke to the star mid-morning. Denzel, we need a statement. We need to frame this as an attempt to find peace. Something light. Denzel was quiet on the other end. He was already back on a private jet heading west. Marvin, I said what I needed to say on the train. There is nothing else to add. But the optics, Denzel. The kid is getting death threats. Then maybe he'll learn that silence is a defense, Denzel replied, his tone final. We're not making a statement. Let the silence do the work. Here's the silence of the aftermath. The incident achieved something PR companies spend millions trying to manufacture. Absolute, unassailable moral victory. For days, the video dominated the news cycle. It wasn't about politics or scandal. It was about the universal desire for order, for respect, and for the wisdom of age to guide the recklessness of youth. Jake Rourke's life was immediately complicated. His college issued a bland statement about respecting public space, but the damage was done. His social media accounts were flooded with thousands of comments, alternating between hate and strange, unsolicited life advice. He became a social pariah, not because he was filmed breaking a law, but because he was filmed breaking a social contract and being immediately powerfully humbled for it. His attempts to go back online and resume his cynical commentary failed miserably. Every tweet, every post was met with a chorus of replies repeating the single sentence, "Have you been quiet enough to hear what the world is trying to teach you?" He didn't delete his accounts. He simply went silent. The music stopped. The digital swagger evaporated. The most profound consequence was not the public shaming, but the internal shift. For the first time in his young adult life, Jake Rourke had experienced a real consequence, delivered not by a system, but by a simple, undeniable truth spoken by a man who had earned the right to speak it. He started noticing the noise everywhere, the grinding of the refrigerator, the constant chatter on campus, the blare of traffic. It was exhausting. He realized that for years, the loudness of his music had been a desperate attempt to drown out the confusing loudness of the world, and Denzel Washington had merely pointed out the futility of the tactic. He had confused avoidance with focus. Months passed. The initial viral fire died down, replaced by the next digital outrage, the next fleeting moment of collective attention. But the story of the quiet car confrontation settled into the cultural memory as a kind of urban legend, the moment Denzel Washington taught the youth about respect. Denzel, meanwhile, continued his work, his reputation only enhanced by the stoic, unplanned defense of civility. He hadn't sought the moment had sought him, finding him exactly where he was, tired, weary, but unwilling to compromise on the fundamentals. The incident resonated because it spoke to the fundamental erosion of shared public space. In a world saturated with performance and volume, Denzel reminded everyone that true power often lies not in making noise, but in demanding silence. The postscript Jake Rourke never returned to his aggressive social media presence. He changed his major from media arts to urban planning. He started spending hours in the local university library, sitting in the designated quiet area, not reading textbooks but just listening to the turning of pages, the soft breathing of the students, the distant rumble of the city. He wasn't trying to hear the sound of silence anymore. He was trying to hear the sound of the world operating without him demanding its attention. He was trying to identify what exactly the world was trying to teach him. He learned that the greatest source of distraction isn't external noise, it's internal panic. And that respect isn't given to those who yell the loudest, but to those who listen the deepest. The true lesson of the quiet car wasn't about Denzel Washington's celebrity. It was about his humanity. He didn't use his fame as a weapon. He used his experience as a mirror. He held up that mirror to a young man and forced him to look at the reflection of his own selfishness. The confrontation on the Acela was a reminder that some men, through the sheer force of their lives, transcend their occupation. They stop being actors or writers or politicians, and they simply become keepers of the flame, custodians of tradition, mentors whether they intend to be or not. Denzel Washington was just trying to take a train ride and read his book. Jake Rourke was just trying to ignore the world. But the world always demands attention eventually. And sometimes, the only way to hear its lessons is to turn off the noise and finally listen. The world needs more people like this. Share if you agree.